I want to talk about this while I am thinking about this. My energies are pretty high, so let's do the news. I have been, to put it mildly, energized by these protests. You have no idea. It bugs my wife to no end. Because I look at this as an inflection point. It is bizarre to me, being an African American in America, because, by definition, and to see the country in this way fall off its axis and say, hey, what's with that black thing? And have the rest of the world turn around and say, yeah, what's with that black thing? And to go further than that, to have the public agree. 80% of the public agrees with you. And this notion that there's something wrong with the way you do policing here. Now, my point that I make here is that any argument about policing is intrinsically linked to an argument about poverty. They're intertwined. The very basis and fact and point of that cop, in really large terms, is because of poverty. You have basic inequality in your system. And that inequality in your system necessitates something to keep order. If it was slaves, well, that thing to keep order would have kept that slavery in place and would have been up on his horse about the fact if that slave tried to run. How dare that slave try to run? Why? Because he's only there to keep order. That's his job. It is the poor being paid to police the other poor. If it was apartheid, same thing. Or if it's 95% of the income going to the top 1%, same thing. You have a system that creates conditions, that drives the police into it. So if you're really talking about police, especially in the context of how police engage African Americans, again, any conversation about African Americans is intrinsically linked to issues of class, despite the fact that the Democratic Party has broken black politics and decoupling those things. The reality of it is, what you're saying in large mass protests is an inciting incident of a man being murdered for 9 minutes. And the public recoiling at that because they could see it. They could see the humanity of it. You had a world who also did so. Now, this is simultaneously in the midst of 40 million people being out of a job. 40 million people. Nearly the same amount who are going to lose their health care. More than 2 million people infected with the virus. More than 110,000 dead, with more than 1,000 dying every day. Add to this an avalanche of evictions that are going to take place because your political instrument has given trillions to the top 1% during a time of grotesque income inequality unlike anything we have ever seen. A political instrument that is at this point entirely not paying attention to what the public wants. So fervently, it no longer pays attention to what the public wants that during a pandemic, it doesn't attend to the needs of the public. Because what they want is for the public to go back to work, even if that means putting themselves in conditions where they will get ill and those communities will get sick. What did the UK government, the Conservative Tory government, herd immunity? Let the weak die off. Let the weak die off. The weak could die off. Boris Johnson's ass ended up in intensive care. But he had medical to cover that. But so did everybody else in the UK because they had universal health care. So regardless of how dirt poor an individual was, the society at the very least accepted that human beings have value. And as such, we will ensure that those human beings get the health care that they need without having a burdensome bill on their back, or for that matter, a disincentive for them to go and get care. We don't do that here. That wasn't even offered here in the middle of a pandemic, which is my point. A large number of people who were Sanders supporters, who fervently supported him, realized something. We won the argument. In city to city to city, all across the United States, every place that voted, every state, Medicare for all won the argument. Not just won the argument. Medicare for all is something that 8 years ago, and I do have a point for this, 8 years ago, would not even be brought up. You couldn't even get a public option brought up. That fight that took place over Medicare for all took place in hostile territory where 20 candidates took aim at it, shot at it, did everything that they could with every weapon that they can get their hands on, and they lost. They lost that argument. And so now, after losing that argument, your people who believe that they're in a democracy and believe that the political system to which they ascribe to and that they work for and that they put in office year after year after year for 40 years on this blue no matter who nonsense. And they win this argument. They win multiple arguments. And the candidate who eventually takes it says, if magically you got a House and a Senate to back it, I will veto it. Kick rocks. I don't care what you want. Despite the fact that 88% of the public, meaning Democrats, wanted it, 70% of the public wanted it, and the numbers for it went up during the pandemic. I don't care what you want. Your political instrument doesn't care. Those people are in the streets, in part, yes, because that black man was murdered by that cop. But 1,000 murders or killings take place every year. And they've taken place year after year after year. That is a national shame. And yet, it's this one that did it. Just like the Rosa Parks thing that kicked something else off. Or the Russian Revolution thing, women coming out angry. There are times, there are moments, there are inflection points where your society listens. And in listening, your political instrument is given a clear demand because your media is listening. This is why I keep saying your demand needs to be massive and expansive, because what your political system is going to do is what the Democratic Party is trying to do right now. And the reality of it is, you don't want to give up all of this. All of these people who are angry and pushing and are out in the streets, you want something that is commiserate with all of that, that solves and gets to the root cause of your issue. And that is something that your political system will do everything in its power not to do, every bit as fervently during civil rights, or for that matter, workers' rights. Mark my words. Your issue here is poverty. And in trying to get your political system to stop the national shame of making the national choice to put in cops in situations that cops can do nothing about, and then bitch and moan about it after the fact, where we accept having all of these people in prisons, disposable human beings, as opposed to actually saying, let's invest in those communities where we know statistically eliminates the need for that edifice. Your political system is paid by people to not do that and to instead use the cheaper solution, at least for them, because it doesn't necessarily all that much violence is not visited upon them in the way that is visited to people who are in the lower income bracket, throwing cops. The Democratic Party is offering you right now performative trash. Forgive me for being brutal. Performative trash. As opposed to getting to the root of the matter, which is what your movement, what this group of people needs to push for. Eliminating poverty. I understand that this goes beyond just a black issue. But the cop issue is not just a black issue. Yes, African Americans may die at a higher percentage, but those 1,000 deaths weren't all black. This is the point. There's this weird skew in our society when we're talking about this stuff. If you ask an average white person, they would say there are more blacks on welfare, missing the point that blacks only make up 13% of the population. You're hurting yourself in your perspectives of the way your world is distributed. Those cops are also killing you. The poverty thing, where you're throwing a device to keep order in a system that is trying to throw itself apart because of the amount of inequality that's in it. Get rid of the inequality. You get rid of cops. I promise you. It's not going to get rid of all crime, no. But will it get rid of the low-hanging fruit that is going to take a large statistical percentage and make a huge number of better people, not to mention making your society healthier, happier, more people going to school, more people that are healthier? Those are great things that we should want for an evolved society. The catch becomes getting your political device to do what is infinitely doable. It's not for you to figure out how, it's for them to figure out how. But the point is for us to make that demand and to be very clear and specific in that demand. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. I am fired up on this issue for some reason. I'm going to show you. You've seen Nancy Pelosi kneeling for 9 minutes. You guys have seen that. You should not care one iota about that. Zero. The reality of it is, in real terms, your political device has moved exceedingly far to the right. Have you ever asked why? It's moved that far to the right because people have dumped tons of money into that political system. And the people who are dumping tons of money, by definition, have tons of money. And when it comes to races, 90% of those elections are won by the side with the most cash. Now, you tell me, rational human being, you have dollars or pitchforks. There are no pitchforks to be found. You have a ton of dollars. You move in the direction of the dollars. Democrats deal with this by being least worst and making the argument, basically, you have to vote for us because we're least worst. We're least worst. Blue no matter who. Blue no matter who. Now, put aside the fact that the blue no matter who argument has bled off voters because you've become so marginal that a lot of people, regardless of what the argument that you make, don't care about that argument and stop voting. And the largest share of those people just so happen to be typically your voters, people of color and people in the lower economic spectrum. Put that to the side for the moment, meaning you're basically stabbing yourself as you screech the stupid argument of blue no matter who. But you actually do need to get real things done. And allowing your political system to move so far to the right, you get to the point where the public can't even conceive of doing left-wing things. So a man who says, hey, let's make sure each person has Medicare for all, they say, wow, that's radical. As opposed to being, that's the most rational thing in the world. Now, the catch is, even though they would agree with that, they don't necessarily believe conceptually that a person like that could win. Why? Because you've moved so far to the right in your political space under this blue no matter who nonsense that you've screwed up the public's perspective of the world. On top of that, you've lost accountability. Meaning any notion of having a Democratic Party that has a substance, that's a thing to it, that's objective in regards to what it believes in. We believe in universal health care, so that's our thing. I don't give a shit what the Republican Party is. This is our thing. No, you've had a party that has been entirely relative to the other party, in which case it just trended to the right. Now, will there be at some point accountability in this process where your political device listens to you? Now, I'm making the point to you that the reason, part and parcel to the reason that your political device has become so tone deaf is because of that feature, that blue no matter who nonsense, where regardless of what the Democrat is, Bill Clinton wants to privatize Social Security, blue no matter who. Obama gives 95% of the income to the top 1%, blue no matter who. At some point, you must come to a reckoning when you realize that has failed. You went from FDR, John F. Kennedy going to the moon, to Joe Biden. Put that in perspective. That matters. That matters. The arc of time matters. Now, the people went to the streets. What were they supposed to do? Honestly, you should be happy they're not burning shit down. These are just lefties. Now, the catch becomes, can these lefties articulate what they want and process that in terms that get real material gains that are instantiated when the public says, this is what we are as a better society from this perspective that we've taken on this issue. Netflix having black issues are nice, but the real nub of it, the thing that you're trying to get to is, why are those cops there? I don't want my mom telling me I want cops in my neighborhood. You're basically saying there is a threat somewhere, and I need a display of force, a strong man, a he-man, to be in that neighborhood to stop that. Well, why is that neighborhood that way? Is it possible that that neighborhood is somewhat impoverished, left behind, and in the process of leaving the neighborhood behind, you have something that can fester in that neighborhood? So is it possible that maybe the thing is, why don't we rebuild that neighborhood, take that neighborhood? It's exactly what they do in war, right? That's what the strategy they were using in Iraq. We'll take a block, we'll expand to the block, we'll push the people out, and we'll move. I'm saying do the same thing here, just don't use military. ensure that there are jobs, ensure that there's investment, make sure that neighborhood grows and flourishes just like every other fucking neighborhood. This notion of food deserts is abominable. It is a national stain that this is allowed. There are no cops in my neighborhood. There's nobody asking for cops in my neighborhood. And to put this in perspective, there's stores nearby. I guess I'm trying to make the point that there's a difference in how some people live, where it's not this ever-present thing of a cop is going to grab me, or I need a strong man in my neighborhood because my neighborhood has fallen into disrepute, versus, okay, we're just going to try to make cops better people. It's in the bricks. You can't make cops better people. It's in the bricks. The way they engage you, the incentive structure that's built into giving them that level of authority in and of itself is problematic. Cops are going to be cops because they're in the position that makes them, to some degree, cops. Not to mention your engagement with this from the standpoint of the African American community, it is in the bricks. What I mean by that is, it was always meant to criminalize you using the police. Let me repeat that. That needs to be understood. When people are making this thing, okay, we're going to make the cops cuddly, we're going to give them sensitivity training or whatever else, it misses the point that the entire policy that these guys engage in was set back in the 60s, which was meant to criminalize African Americans, who at the time they thought was working with the Soviets. Those laws haven't all that much changed. In fact, those laws have gotten worse. Those laws have gotten worse, especially under people like Joe Biden, who is now, or was going to the Floyd thing, and has been trying to assume the role of king of blackness. This is drug czar dealing with Nixon. John Ehrlichman, criminal. You want to know what this is really about? He was asked with a bluntness of a man with public disgrace and a stretch in federal prison. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies: the anti-war left and black people. The White House after that had to, you understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be black or anti-war, but we could, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and black with heroin, and criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt the communities. The entire point of the drug war was to go after blacks and hippies, which were political enemies. They maintained that drug war for the last 40, 50 fucking years. Like, understand what I'm saying? It's in the bricks. You making an argument about defunding the police doesn't necessarily get to the point that why are they there and why are they necessary? Defunding the police assumes and accepts that they're a necessary component to your society. I don't. Yes, you may need something that may have to keep some level of order, but I'm making the point that the inequality is the thing that is digging in you as a human being that you feel at a gut level is just fundamentally wrong, which will always create this level of chaos. Yes, that is to some degree an ideological belief. But I can look at statistics that tell me that there is some fire to that smoke. If Democrats are going to do anything about the policing thing, that means they need to get to poverty. Now, our ask is eliminate poverty. I don't know how to get to the moon, but I can figure this shit out. Kennedy. Our generation, get rid of poverty. Yes, that's a big lift, but that's an infinitely doable thing. This is an act of policy. This is not an act of God. This is choice. Jeff Bezos is going to be a trillionaire. Is that right? In the context of 40 million people out of a job. Is that fair? When in real terms, Jeff Bezos cannot make a penny without his workers, human beings, people buying his products, roads being built by our tax dollars, roads being built by human beings, paid by our tax dollars to build. I'm making the point that he does not exist without human beings. Why do you believe that a system that gives him that much money is fair when that system is, again, made by policy? This is not an act of God. This needs to get to the root of the issue if we're going to have this long, big conversation from the standpoint of why do we have this level of chaos? Is it possible, to any degree that's possible, that the things that you bitch and complain about, meaning your society, crime, killings, opioid abuse, people who are committing suicides, is it possible, to any degree that's possible, that the reason those things exist is intrinsically linked to the way that you live. Not just the people who are doing those things, but you and an upper class. Is it also possible that when we're talking about intrinsically linked, what we're mostly talking about is a small percentage of the culpable who make those policies and who benefit those policies, but do not have the experience, the things that those other people have that we bitch about? And if that is true, then your political space is going to relent and entirely resist any notions of getting rid of poverty, because that entirely allows them to be who they are and to persist the way they persist. Now, this is why I screamed at the height of my lungs early on, watch, the Democratic Party is going to give you a token gesture. Joe Biden right now is saying we need to give the cops $300 million more. We need to give the cops $300 million more. Now, Nancy Pelosi, a few years ago, put out this. Don't offer support for Black Lives Matter policy positions. Why? Because, believe it or not, despite the name, a lot of those policies get to poverty. It gets to poverty. What do you think Martin Luther King was marching about? Yes, it was that black thing, but that black thing was intrinsically linked to poverty. The Democratic Party has broken black politics because they slid so far to the right. Understand, the person who was screaming about this, Sanders, back in the 80s, was kicked out of the race by a black president who gave 95% of the income to the top 1% and let black homeowners go bust. On top of that, for people who make this thing, oh, vote, Amy Klobuchar, Democrat, allowed Chauvin to kill Anthony Reyes in addition to shoot additional other people on the job before that person killed George Floyd, the person who we're protesting right now. On top of that, Black Lives Matter started during a black president. That illegal chokehold that's supposed to be made was still employed, and he still walked. They are going to focus on the cops, and they want to make this very specific, as if the problem here is the cops, as opposed to a system that requires those cops in the first place. Defund the cops, yes, but defund them organically in a way of saying they no longer need to exist. I know some people disagree with me on that, and they think that the poverty thing might be too broad, but I think in terms of a maximalist position, my maximalist position, if I'm being honest, would be arguing freedom. Nobody has a context for that. So I can't argue that. You have to argue and meet people where they are. What people do know is poverty. 40% of your country, to put this in perspective, 40%, 44%, if I'm not mistaken, make $18,000 a year. Put that in perspective. Understand what that means. 44%. That's nearly half of your entire society that's working is bringing in $18,000 a year to live off. That should cut deep in you in regards to getting across that the richest country on the planet has an underclass that is dirt poor. On top of this, I mean, for fuck's sake, to show the racial disparity in this. In 2016, the median black household had $18,000 in net worth compared to $171,000 for whites. You have to deal with that. That's not, you can argue incompetence, but that is kind of being dishonest if you're going to have a real appraisal of that stuff, especially when you look in the context of slavery. Now, looking at that number immediately brings up stuff of like reparations, because that number is so stark. And it's not a situation where it's gotten better, it's gotten worse, because ultimately, if everybody is just out there working and doing their thing, there's no way for that number to ever change. The wealth in that case just grows in one direction while you get a permanent underclass. And by the way, large people, white. White. We make up 13%. We're talking about you also. That's why I look at this and I think cops are also killing whites. The disparity may be there, yes. Disparity is there, absolutely. But this cop problem is a cop problem. Yes, it's policing. I don't want them choking me. I don't want to deal with the cop at all. Under the best of conditions, I don't care how many cats or puppies they give them to cuddle. I want them eliminated from our society as just a typical fixture. that will be resisted. I get it. By the same token, you can do so by cutting down on the chaos that takes place in your society when you put people in horrible, horrible conditions constantly. You get a society that allows your people to get health care, that allows them to grow in the context of the educations they want to receive, that allows them to have meals and homes. I guarantee you, all of the chaos that you're complaining about will diminish greatly. Even, believe it or not, some racial tension. I don't have this belief that you can eliminate it. You're going to have X number of percentage. But I can't deal with that. I have no power over that. The stuff that I have power over is this. This is a policy issue. And as a policy issue and as a policy demand, get rid of poverty. Go do your job. The American public wants it. Do your job. I can give you some very basic pointers. Medicare for all, elimination of student debt, and expansion of Social Security. Start there and continue from there. I guess my point is this is something that's an issue of policy. It's not an act of God. Tell your elected leaders to do their job. And this movement should be around. Yes, policing is problematic, but we can deal with policing and defunding policing organically by eliminating poverty. Make the movement be about something big, expansive, that not only gets to the heart of that one specific issue, but starts looking at the broader issues and the root causes of those broader issues. And I would make the point that the root cause of the issue of policing really does boil down to inequality that requires those cops to even exist. Like, share, subscribe. The pigs are showing their true colors along with their supporters. Jamal, you've always been a great and curating news. Oh, thanks, man. Keep up the good work. I appreciate it. This video went longer than I wanted, but I really do want to nail that point home because I'm really excited about that point. As people go out and get really angry and everything else about this is an injustice, I really do believe that a lot of those people, I mean, you have so many people, I've never seen anything like it, of all of these various racial and everything else distributions. I am very curious about what happens in July and when eviction takes place. And if this is going to be like other, you have 40 million people who are out of work. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. And it becomes this kind of discrediting thing for the ability of your system to do what your system is supposed to do. Honestly, the question is, do these go anywhere? And do these get co-opted by the Democratic Party and basically dissipated into nothingness? They've been peaceful. They've been loud. The media has been paying attention to them with somewhat of a positive look. What happens? Like, share.